Do whatever it takes to be the best version of you.
Hey guys, how you doing? Joe here. This week's topic chat came from, I've been listening to a podcast now for a really good podcast that I contribute this podcast to changing a hell of a lot into how I am and how I think and just different behaviors that I have with me personally as well. The podcast is called The Secret to Success. Now, that podcast, for people who don't listen to the podcast, but people who may know of a guy called Dr. Eric Thomas, or E.T. the Hip Hop Preacher. He's this really cool motivational speaker. I think rated #1 motivational speaker in the world. And, you know, just the way he delivers topics really it gets people to think about things a different way, right? A lot of what he speaks about, and I spoke to this week's topic in the podcast, or subjects around the topic in the podcast, but he speaks a lot to the topic of feelings versus facts. Now, it really hit home for me. A lot of different scenarios in my life, but also people who I interact with and people who I help out with different things and different occasions. Feelings versus facts. Now I'm gonna look at relationships, right? I've got different friends, both male and female, that come to me and say, "Hey, listen, my relationship's rocky, things aren't great." I say, well, have a look at I ain't a relationship counselor by any means, but I say, look at these different things in the relationship. Now you look at, obviously, try and take out the feelings of how you feel and what you feel and start to have a look at the facts, right? And what I mean by that is, when you look at things factual rather than the feelings, there's grey areas when it comes to feelings, because you get all in those feels and I say to a lot of people, we don't love the person, we love the person who we want them to be. And when we're looking at these different things, and especially with our relationships, the evidence will come in how they treat you. And this isn't just marital relationships or partnerships or it's friendships as well, right? So we have a look at all the different aspects of our relationships in our life, and sometimes we find it hard to pull away from those relationships because of the way we feel about the person. And it gets blurry because the way we feel about the person sometimes isn't necessarily how that person is treating us. And then we start to accept different behaviors and accept different things that go on, which then makes it all messy for everyone involved. But when feelings get in the way, it's super hard to see what I mean by feelings versus facts. When we have a look at the facts of what a relationship is, I guess the evidence of how that relationship is how that person treats you. Now, everyone has feelings, and everyone's feelings get swayed differently. Everyone's thoughts on things get swayed differently due to their feelings. Yeah, you have a look at the sports culture in Australia, right? So we look at people and their love for sport, or their love for teams of sport. Now I can look at a one-eyed supporter who will swear black and blue that their team is the best team and their player is the best player. And I look at that player and I'm like, picking holes all through his game and picking holes in all the way that they do things, even as a team. But the person who is one-eyed about that sports team is really in their feelings rather than looking at the facts of the sports teams. And that comes down to me as well, where if I don't like a sports team or a sports player, that's because of the way I feel about things. Now, the same with our relationships. When we feel about relationships, it's super hard to see the toxic behaviors. It's super hard to see the I guess the mistreatment as well that we have in our relationships. Now, I had a female mate of mine who was struggling to leave her partner, and it was for about a 12-month period, I reckon. Once every month to 6 weeks, she'd continuously come back to me and say, this is what's happening, this is the treatment, this is the way I'm being spoken to, this is what's happening with me mentally and emotionally. It wasn't, it wasn't physical, but mentally, emotionally. This is what was happening. And alarm bells were not only for me, but there were alarm bells for her as well, because she knew the behaviors were wrong, but she found it super hard to leave that relationship because of the feelings that were invested in that relationship. Now, there's multi-layers to this sort of stuff. When we look at, troubled relationships or friendships, when we're struggling to move, I believe we need to separate the feelings from the facts. And the facts will give you evidence in how that person treats you. Now, that person's now, the friend of mine has now left the relationship, and they can see from the outside looking in, what was I thinking the entire time? What was I thinking the entire time? And again, I was continuously saying that you didn't want to see it because you were caught in your feelings rather than looking at the facts of what was happening in the relationship. Now, how's that going with you? How's that hitting in your life? Are the relationships that you're having in your life, are we looking at things factually about how we are being treated, or how we're treating people? Or are we just continuously sitting in the feelings? Like, I have multiple people that want to leave the relationship they're in, but stay because of the hope that it might get better. Again, that's feelings. I'm not against people who want to stay and work things out. By no means, I want that, and I hope it works out for those people. But when we're looking at, and again, I questioned, do you love the person, or do you love the person, or do you love who you want that person to be? And that can come from, honeymoon periods early on in relationships as well. So, looking at your relationships in your life, start to look at the facts. It's great to sit in feelings. It's great to sit in the feelings of what you want it to be, or when you're being treated beautifully, everyone's happy. But when it starts to go a little bit south, I think we have to separate and start to look at the facts. The evidence will show in how that person is treating you. When we sit in our feelings, we'll accept bad behaviors. When we're sitting in our feelings, we'll accept narcissistic behaviors. We'll even be convinced that our behaviors are wrong because of, narcissistic traits by that partner in the relationship as well. So do your best to separate the feelings from the facts. It's good to have both. But when things start to go south, have a look at the feelings and how they differentiate from the facts in your relationship. When things start to go south, start to concentrate more on the facts of how, and the evidence will be in how that person is treating you. Hope you will.